it's actually a great segue into our next speaker, our keynote speaker for this event, which is Dr. Robert Brown. And so I'd like to I'd like to introduce Dr. Brown in terms of some of the things that he's done, but more importantly, in terms of what I think it means for him to be here and the impact that he has. So just briefly, I met Dr. Brown just a couple weeks ago. Ross and Tara Sue invited us down to North Carolina for a meeting, and we were sitting out at a picnic table. And actually before that, they walked me through rooms with all these pictures of Dr. Robert Brown. And it seems like every important person in the world. I didn't see him there with the Pope, but I'm sure there's a photograph of something like that. But with presidents, heads of state, business leaders, and they told me a little bit about him before I met him. And then so we were sitting out at the picnic table, and he walked over, very humble, just like shooting the breeze, and I asked him a question, right? And before I tell you the question, I need to tell you a little bit about his background. So Dr. Robert Brown grew up in very humble beginnings, and he'll share. I'm hoping he will share that story with us and the influences he had. But in that, he became somebody who was committed to bring people together. And during the time that he grew up and he matured professionally, he faced all kinds of struggles. And he said something to me that was really striking about bringing people together. And he took hits from the right, from the left, from the blacks, from the whites. He overcame incredible adversities to really make an impact in our world. And so I asked him this question. I said, Dr. Brown, you overcame a lot. What was it about you? I said, you achieved an incredible level of success. And he's probably very humble. He probably won't share this. He may share this with you, but he has been essentially with some of the top people in society, politically, business. And I said, what was it about you that caused you to rise from growing up in that poor family, right? Really living in abject poverty, to become one of the most successful human beings on the planet? What was it about you? And after hearing him answer that question, which took about 2 hours, I asked him if he would keynote for our event. I said, listen, we're bringing our leaders together from around the world. In this chat room, I don't know, we have, maybe 24 people. There's over 100 people in the auditorium right now. And so these are GBA leaders, chapter leaders, working group leaders. These are leaders from all over the world. And I said, we're bringing them together for a leadership summit where we're going to be discussing our strategic planning. And I said, our leaders need to hear from you, right? They need to hear, what was it that drove you, right? What was it that, how did you overcome those adversities, right? Because our leaders are going to face those same challenges in different domains, different environments. It may be political, economic, right? But we need to be inspired by leaders who have gone before us and stand on the shoulders of giants. And it's from that perspective that I'm proud and pleased to introduce Dr. Robert Brown to the GBA leadership team. So Dr. Brown, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here, and I am so grateful for our conversation when you came here to North Carolina. It was a great time for me, and it was great to meet you and to understand from Tara Sue and Ross what blockchain organizations were trying to do all around the country and indeed around the world. And I said, this is a glorious movement. I mean, this is something that all of us ought to be joining in and pushing hard, because there's nothing that we can achieve if we get our heads together and our hearts together, our strengths together, and start working together. There's absolutely nothing that we can't achieve. We can elect world leaders, we can change governments, We can change companies. We can indeed change the world. We can free up people. And I've had a chance to see that at work. And thank God I've been a part of making it work in a lot of different places around the world. And so I've been blessed immensely. And so today I feel like I'm further blessed to be here with the blockchain organization around the country and to be with all you guys again who I've met already. Let me just start off by saying not only thank all of you for inviting me and for the opportunity to be here, but to be here and talk about what is going on and what we all probably need to do and what we can do. We have the potential of raising blockchain to a level where you can't even believe. Because in my lifetime, growing up here in High Point and in North Carolina, my grandmother raised me, my grandmother, my grandfather, and my grandmother's father was a slave in Eastern North Carolina. One of the first things I remember in my life is a young boy, when my grandmother thought I was old enough to understand what was going on. I was about 8 or 9 years old. And I knew about slavery and all that. She used to tell us a few stories about growing up and about her father and what he did and how he was a slave. But one day I was sitting around the house and she said, Bobby, and you and your brother Billy, I'm going to get you guys together because I want you all to ride with me on the bus in the morning. We're going down to Fayetteville, North Carolina, and from there we're going on to my home area in Wadesboro, where her sisters and brothers live. And I didn't know what was happening. I'd never been to Fayetteville before. So the next morning we went on, got on the bus and rode down to Fayetteville. We got off the bus and we had to change buses there. So the bus at the depot, he said, look, the guy was in charge, said, you all have about an hour and a half before the next bus comes in to take you all over the short distance to Wadesboro. And my grandmother said, that's fine. I thought that was going to be the case. So that's why we came through here. So we got to she asked the bus depot director, where is that old mart around here? She said, I know it's around here close back because I've been there several times. And he said, oh, just right down the street. You'll see that building on the right-hand side. Just walk down about a block and a half. So my brother and I didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know anything about any building or anything about Fayetteville. We had never been there before. And so she walked outside the bus station and we went down about a block and a half or 2 blocks walking. And we came to this old building. It was kind of rusty white, bricks were peeling and all that. And she said, I just wanted to bring you boys here to show you where my father was sold for the last time. And I will never forget it because it imbued into my very soul something that I hadn't felt before, and I haven't felt since. The fact that my great-grandfather, my grandmother who was raising me, her father was sold in that building for the last time. And so here I am today. And here I am having had some experiences all over the world, many times with all kinds of things. I think many of you know that I served at the White House assistant to President Nixon. I went there to serve a year and served 4 years and 2 months. And I've worked for several of the major candidates who were running for president, both Democrats and Republicans. President Nixon happened to be the first Republican president that I worked for. And I worked for him because Bobby Kennedy, who I'd been working with and traveling with to some degree, and was killed. In fact, I was supposed to have been with him the day he was killed. I sent one of my guys who worked with me to be with him. He was there when he was killed. And so I was disillusioned And I said, you know, I need to get away from all this craziness. I don't need this anymore in my life. And because Martin Luther King Jr. had been killed, and he was one of my closest friends. I traveled with him, served on his board, his executive committee, raised money for him, went to jail, and did the whole 9 yards. And now I'm working with Bobby Kennedy, and he's shot. And so, and then all of a sudden, as the good Lord would will it, I was approached by two fellows who I knew very well, who were working for the Republican Party, the Republican National Committee, and who were working for Richard Nixon in that campaign. And they cornered me and bashed on me for about 3 or 4 hours in New York, asking me to work with Nixon or just to work with them and give them advice and counsel. And after a while, I agreed to do that 1 or 2 days a week. That lasted only a short while because I got so deeply involved in dealing with all kinds of things in that campaign until the president or president to be, the campaign, Mr. Nixon's campaign, I did some things that sort of helped him immeasurably that he found out about, that he didn't even know about. And he wanted to know who did this and who did that. And they told him Bob Brown did it. And when they told him that, he said, I want this fella on the campaign playing with me the rest of this campaign. And you find him right now. So they found me and told me what he wanted, and I agreed to do it. And for the rest of the campaign, the last 2.5 months of the campaign, I went with him everywhere he campaigned, all over America until the very end. And that's how I became involved heavily. And that's how I went to the White House. And I had no intention of, and I told them when they asked me to come that after the campaign and you knew they had won, I said, hey, look, I'm not looking for a job. I'll be a consultant, but I have to keep with my business. And somehow or another, Mr. Nixon wouldn't hear that. And so he asked me to come in to help them get the new administration started. And I told him I'd come and stay for 3 or 4 months. The 3 or 4 months ended up being 4 years. And I became involved in a little bit of everything all around America and in other parts of the world. And so that's a part of how I got to this point. I was already representing a number of major corporations like Woolworth, A&P, Johnson Wax, and a number of other companies all over America and indeed in other parts of the world doing troubleshooting, helping them all kinds of ways with race relations and marketing and examining their what they were doing and everything else. And so here I am today, all of these years later, and talking here to the Blockchain Association about all of the important things and major things that this group is doing now and what it can do globally, not just here in America, but this sets the stage for a whole new portion of what can happen in this world, and we can change it. But I'd just like to just mention 2 or 3 things, and I know that maybe some of the people, or you guys have a few questions for me when I finish this dissertation. But one of the things that I found out early on is that you have to go right at something. If you want something, you got to go get it. You got to spend the time. You got to sacrifice, and you got to let everybody in. You can't have just a little thing here for a small group of people and think it's going to work. It's not going to work. People have to be energized and wanting to go forward and working with everybody in the organization to take it forward. And I believe that's what blockchain is. That's what blockchain is all about. We have an opportunity with blockchain to change the face of America and indeed change the face of the world. And if we can continue organizing and lifting up all of what everybody is doing with blockchain, all the leadership, all the people involved with it, all over America and indeed all over the world. There is nothing that blockchain can't do. And, you know, just to give you 2 or 3 indications of what a single individual might be able to do. When I went to the White House, there were GSA, which is the agency within our government that builds buildings all over America. They spend billions of dollars every year. And they hire all kinds, they have contractors and they determine what the contractors do and who they hire and all that. They had buildings going up all over America and brick buildings. And they didn't have one black brick mason company or one black brick mason working on any of those buildings. And when I did a review of what was going on in our government with all kinds of things like that, I found that out and I went bonkers. And of course, I called in the fella, Bob Kunzik, who we had just hired, and I had a lot to do with hiring him as the head of GSA. And I told him, I said, hey, look, all of this we want to get straightened out. And I recommended that he hire a brilliant black guy, be one of his assistants, that would be on top of this 24 hours a day. And that's what he did. He said, I'd be glad to do it. And then we changed the surface that no builders would be building government buildings if they didn't have a policy to hire all people, blacks and women and everybody else. And the contracts that they would be letting all over the place, that they would let them freely, not just because they were black. If they were black and they didn't have the skill, they couldn't get the contract. But if you were black or other minority or whoever you were, and you had the skill, you had an opportunity. This is America. This is what America is supposed to be about. And the reason why I love what you guys are doing, the blockchain, it's spread out across everywhere. And you're doing it with all people. And you're giving all people an opportunity to go forward and to work together and to make something happen, not only in this country, but indeed in the world. And there's no end to what you can do. We've already seen over and over again that we are in a great nation, a nation of people who want to come together. Sure, we have many detractors from all over the place, but we cannot let that stop us. It has never stopped us from doing anything. If we want to go to the moon, it didn't stop us. There were blacks and whites and other minorities and everybody else entering into the job of taking us to the moon. If we want to capture something or go and free up a lot of people, we have never let anything stop us. If we want to keep our country free and moving ahead, everybody has a chance to do that. And with blockchain, we can do it, because blockchain goes across the board and it covers every segment of our society. And so today, I just want to thank you for all of you for everything that you've done and all the ways that you continue to contribute to our society and our country and the countries and organizations across the world that you are involved with. And so one of the things I'd just like to mention before we get in the Q&A here, a question and answer period, and that is, this is Juneteenth. Most people, a lot of people in this country didn't even know what Juneteenth was until just a few months, a few years ago. Never even, because many times in our schools, they didn't say anything about Juneteenth. In many books, it wasn't in the books. Nobody said anything about Juneteenth. I learned about Juneteenth when I was in high school, and I didn't learn that much about it, but the teachers who were teaching me in American history, and I was really a student of American history. I loved history, I still do. And we had a teacher, her name was Ethel Hughes. I will never forget it. She had 2 master's degrees in teaching in high school and history, and she loved it. And she brought up all these things about Juneteenth and about all these other things that were happening that we couldn't read about in the history books because a lot of it wasn't even in the history books. And so she would tell us about, and Juneteenth was something that I was fascinated about. I was fascinated about because, first of all, because nobody heard about it. Here was a huge deal consisting of people's lives, about people's lives who were blocked off and didn't even know that they were free here in America, the United States of America. And then all of a sudden they found out they were free. And it's a very special time in our history. We don't need to be going back there no more. We need to be going forward. All of us need to be coming together to do what we need to do. And blockchain is a parcel of that. Blockchain can be one of the great leadership groups in doing this. We have an opportunity. And I thank God for all of you and all of you for the organization and all of what you're doing and what you can do. The potential here is unlimited. There's no way that you cannot reach the moon and the sky with all of your efforts. So thank God for you. And I thank you for this opportunity of being with you.
Dr. Brown, I'd like to monopolize. We're going to open it up to questions, question and answers here in just a moment. But I'd like to monopolize it for a few moments first. And I'm going to go and start my video. And so I'd like to ask you a couple questions. The first one is, when I asked you that question when we were at the park bench, you started off by telling about your grandmother, right? And I'm going to ask you a couple other questions about specifically some of the things that you did, including what you did for President Nixon and the train trip, you know, where you saw the girl holding the sign. But you talked about your mother and the influence that she had and how that impacted your thought process, right? Tell our leaders about that. Tell our leaders about, as you went into all of those different situations that were really tough. What was that thought process in your head, and how did your grandmother impact that thought process?
Well, my grandmother impacted in almost every way because she was always, every morning before we went to school, my grandmother said, okay, you boys, my brother was 3 years older than I was, and he was always raring and ready to go. And he listened to my grandmother because she made both of us listen. But every morning before we went to school, we had to get on our knees and pray. I mean, she didn't stand for anything else. My brother would say, oh, we're going to be late for school and all this. We ain't got time to pray this morning. And she would just look at him real hard and say, you better get on your knees, boy. And we would get on knees and pray. She would have a prayer with us and, you know, saying, lift this country up, lift this town up, lift our boys up, let them get all that they can get in their head so they can help somebody. And that was her theme about everything. How can you help somebody? Because I saw her light about helping people in our communities. We would share our food. People would be put out of their homes and so forth. And my grandmother would have people, we didn't have a big house or anything. She would make pallets on the floor many times, people all up there were old people, and she would give them the little beds that my brother and I had. And we would have to sleep on the floor. And we were wondering sometimes, why in the world is my grandmother giving up all of this for all these old people and all these other people who've been put out and who don't have a job or anything, don't have anything to eat, and we were sharing our food. But then I have benefited in a major way from all of this because it left me something deep in my soul, in my heart, to move on and to try to correct some of these deficiencies in our society.
Yeah, that's very powerful, and it really embodies the spirit of what we're trying to do in our organization. Is to really create an organization that cares about people and recognizing the value that you got out of that. The next question I'd like to ask you is: you shared with me a story with candidate Nixon, and you mentioned it when you're talking a little earlier. You did something for him. So when he had that rally that he was going to go speak at, the story you told was so incredible in terms of explaining your thought process and how you dealt with a really tough situation like that. So as our leaders are dealing with the situations, they can learn a lot from that example. Can you share the story about what you did for President Nixon that was so transformative for his campaign?
Well, one thing early on, when I first joined him to travel, and I stayed with him for the last couple of months of the campaign, I traveled him everywhere. And on the first day that we started traveling, we took the train trip across Ohio. And we were in a little town called Deshler, Ohio. And we were looking out the window. The president was waving at everybody and going through these little towns, and the train slowed down to a crawl. And we were looking out the window. I'm with two other campaign guys, and we saw this little girl with a sign, and the sign said, "Bring us together, bring us together." And it hit us. I mean, it was like lightning that struck that train, because that was later on down the road, that was all that we were talking about. And we adopted that as a campaign theme for Nixon's 1968 campaign for president. Bring us together, because the country was in an uproar and there were all kinds of things happening, and we were really, really divided in so many different ways. And we adapted that as our campaign theme. And I was one of the persons who was responsible when Nixon was elected to help bring us together, because it had a lot to do with Blacks and other minorities and other folk who were left out of the mainstream, who were left out of everything. And so I have to give my congrats and my thanks to President Nixon and some of his top people, like Bob Finch and Bob Haldeman, for giving me the strength and the force to do whatever I needed to do to make things happen, to change what was happening or what had not been happening in the United States of America.
And early in that campaign, you told me the story about the president had a campaign. He was going to do a speech in, I think, Chicago or someplace like that. Mondale was going to do a speech the week before, and you were able to do something that the other campaign wasn't able to do. And that's a great story about your how you took that concept of bringing us together, how you actually made it real.
Well, there were any number of things during that campaign that really that stuck with me, and I think stuck with the president and everybody who was involved, because there were so many forces trying to pull the country apart. I mean, there was forces on to some extent on both sides, and many of them saw Nixon as not as someone who would bring us together, but someone who would take us apart. And so I felt it, and I talked to President Lind about this, and other Bob Finch and Haldeman and everybody else, about what we ought to be doing and the kinds of things we ought to be doing. And so I went every town and city that we would go in. I knew people, because I'd been working all over the country for the years before I met the president in '68. And so I knew people in almost every city and town that we went in. And if I didn't, I'd call other people who knew. And I would make the contacts there to make sure that they understood that we are running for presidency for all people, and their voices will be heard, no matter whether you're Black, white, Jew, Gentile, whatever you are. And we made that happen. And as soon as the president was elected, we started to put together all the kinds of things that we felt were necessary to follow up and make sure that the president's word was true in fact, and that we were going to be an administration that was going to open up things. Because the minority enterprise, for instance, nobody else was talking really about minority enterprise up till 1968. And in 1969, when we were elected president, when he was elected president, we changed everything. And I was put in charge of that. And we established a minority enterprise agency, which had never been established. And all of the things that the federal government is doing, particularly all in the Department of Defense, the Commerce Department, GSA, all the different agencies. I met with everyone who had any kind of major contracts to distribute in America or indeed in the world to make sure that they understood. And we set up agencies and groups and everything within the government across the board to make that happen, not just to make a speech about it, but to make that happen. And I think where blockchain comes in today, blockchain is a whole nother kind of force that can help us in this country and indeed across the world. This is not just something for us here. This is something that can help us and help many people all across the world. Blockchain.
Yeah, Dr. Brown, you faced all kinds of struggle, right? I mean, you were moving the needle. What were some of the toughest challenges that you had, and what was it? What was your thought process? What was it about you that helped you get through those challenges to make an impact?
Well, some of the toughest challenges that I had early on in the first year or so was that when I knew from talking and having meetings, telephone conferences with different people across the board, I knew that we were not dealing fairly with minorities. I knew that GSA didn't have not one black brick mason putting a brick. I knew that there were other things happening. I knew that they were saying to black entrepreneurs and other minorities and women that there was no way that they could give them any contract because they couldn't get a bond. And so I set up an entity to make sure that they got a bond. Much of it was the bond agency that we set up and monitored it, make sure that they were doing, and made sure that the agencies themselves were doing. I had reports coming to me by telephone, written reports, and other ways. I had meetings constantly with the Department of Defense and other agencies who had huge sums of money, who were spending billions of dollars, but minorities and women were getting almost none of that money. And everybody's paying taxes. I mean, you don't eliminate people from paying taxes because they're black, because they're a woman. Everybody has to pay taxes. So we are all American, and all Americans should benefit.
You told me about a lunch that you had, right? When President Nixon was going to do a speech, but there were going to be riots. They weren't going to allow the president to get off the plane, but you had lunch with some of the opposition. And as you told the story, I thought the way you handled that was just absolute mastery in terms of how you got those two guys that were in such opposition to come across the table. Can you share with us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, well, during the campaign, I think it may have been Bob Finch, one of the guys called me and said, look, we got a problem, Bob, and we want you to work on it and see what you can do, because in this town in Ohio, Mr. Humphrey went there to speak, and there were so many demonstrators at the airport and surrounded the airport, and Humphrey getting off. He looked out the door of his plane and found out that there were so many of them that there's going to be a real big problem for him to get out of the airport. And so he walked down the steps, but he decided after assessing the situation that he would get back on the plane and leave, which he did. And so after he did that, that created a big stir, and politically and in the newspapers and everything else. And so I believe it was Bob Haldeman who called me and said, look, Bob, we want you to go to this town because the president's supposed to go there and have a fundraiser. He's supposed to speak and everything else. And if we can save the president by getting him into town and getting him out of town without him being stopped or they crowding the cars and creating a massive situation, then that will be a huge success for this campaign. And so I went to this town. And when I went there, I said, you know, I need to assess who the big boys are, who are leading all the demonstrations and who have the power in every way to make or break this. And so I found there were two brothers, and they were two big guys and very strong physically and in the community. Nobody was going to buck them. So I went straight to them and met with them, and we talked. And then they said, well, we think about this and we'll call you back later on this evening. So they called me back and came to my hotel. And then I fed them and we sat there and we talked several hours. And after that talk, they said, we'll call you back the next morning and see what we can do. They called me back the next morning. They said, Mr. Brown, we want to work with you. Said we were going to have our demonstrations all around and all over. We'll have demonstrations at the airport and all along the road and at the hotel where Mr. Nixon's speaking. But we will not stop him from speaking. We never will block him like we blocked Humphrey. And so I said, that's a great thing. And I will do whatever is necessary to make sure you guys are dealt with properly and that kind of thing. Well, what happened is Mr. Nixon got off his plane. There were just hundreds of demonstrators with signs and everything. And all the way into town, there were hundreds, but nobody stopped him. Not stopped his delegation, his cars and so forth. He went to the hotel, made a speech, had a fundraiser and everything else. And then when he came out of the hotel, the demonstrators were there with signs and everything. And the same way, there were demonstrators all on the road to the airport. He went, got on his plane, and the trip was a huge success. And so he calls Bob Finch, who was campaign manager, wanting to know what in the world happened. How could I get in here like this? And Mr. Humphrey, they ran him out of town. He couldn't even get out of the airport. And they told him that this guy, Bob Brown, who they had working with them, had orchestrated this, who had worked with the community, and that he did it. And Mr. Nixon told Finch that I want you to find this guy, Bob Brown, and I want him on the plane with me everywhere I go until the end of this campaign. And that's how I got involved, really got involved.
So going into that situation, so you had these two big brothers and they were dead set against Nixon speaking. How did you turn them?
Well, we had a lot of conversation, we had, we had several meals because I had 3 or 4 days at least to change them. And I promised to be helpful to them. I told them that if Mr. Nixon is elected during this campaign, that they will have access to me and to others that I know and to actually whatever decisions the president makes as it relates to minorities or poor and all of that, and that they would be respected and that I have a long memory and that I would work with them and I would come back to that town and I would be in touch with them. I wasn't one of those politicians who gets gonna, massage them and then all of a sudden after everything is over, I'm gonna go away. And I didn't, I kept my word.
I love what you just said. I kept my word, right? I don't think people understand the value of integrity, right? And I know you must have sincerity in your voice when you shared that with them. And then you did some things, right? Besides the contracts, didn't you help get blacks promoted and in the military and in the government?
Oh yeah, that was a daily thing. I mean, there were so many problems that were left behind by the previous administration. I mean, blacks and whites there was a lot of killings going on in Vietnam. We had a war going on. And that was put in my lap to deal with that. between whites and blacks, and not only in Vietnam, but on ships. I mean, there were all kinds of controversy on ships between blacks and whites, on military bases and all over in our government, in our armed forces. So that came under my jurisdiction. And there were other kinds of things that we were trying to promote, like the whole minority enterprise thing, to open up the government to everybody, to women and black people, so that they could get contracts, and to set up the mechanism for them to do that. For instance, one of the things that happened is that the guys would come to the White House to see me, and I'd have them all in a circle, and they would seem like all be ganging up on me, saying that, oh, we can't get bonding. We would let them have the contracts, Bob, but we can't get bonding. Oh, we can't do this, can't do that. And I said, I would have 2 or 3 people there who were with me. And I said, set up a bonding apparatus so that we can, I said, I don't ever want to hear this anymore. I don't want to hear nobody coming off and talking about they can't get no contract because of bonding or something else.
Dr. Brown, can I ask you just 2 more questions? And I know there's a ton of people that want to say some words. But the first question is, tell us about your relationship with Martin Luther King and what you learned from him. And then secondly, tell us about your relationship with Nelson Mandela and what your takeaways were from that relationship. If you could, and then I promise for the folks, Louis, you're first. If you guys want to ask a question or make a comment, by all means, we'll give you some time to do that.
Well, you want me to start now?
Yeah, good. So
Okay.
tell us about your relation with Martin Luther King and what you
Okay.
learned from him, and then after that, Nelson Mandela.
Martin Luther King Jr. was a great friend and a great leader who I met on a trip to Atlanta early on in 1961. And I went to his office. His top guy was Dr. Y.T. Walker, who I had met at Virginia Union University, where I spent my first year of college. And he was the chief of staff and the close person running SCLC. And I ran into him in a restaurant, and he said, I want you to come down and meet Dr. King. And Bob, he needs to talk to you. And so I went to the office, and Dr. King, I walked in his office, and he said, you Bob Brown. He said, I've been waiting to meet you, and we need your help. And then he proceeded to tell me all of the different problems that they were having, raising money and doing this and doing that. And he said, you can be very helpful, Bob, if you will, to be helpful. I said, I will do everything I can to be helpful. I said, what you're doing is a godsend for our people, Black people and all people, and for our country. And so I will help. So I proceeded to be helpful. I raised money for him. I traveled with him. I set up meetings with different people and all kinds of things all over the country. And so he became a very close personal friend. And I was devastated when he was killed. And it was a bad time in my life.
And Nelson Mandela, you had a very special relationship with the Mandela family.
Well, I met Nelson Mandela, and I had gone to South Africa. One of my clients, which was Sara Lee Corporation, one of the large corporations at that time in the country, or indeed in the world, and they had bought a company called Nicholas Kiwi that had a big operation in South Africa. And the chairman called me one day and he said, this is not going to be a good thing for us, Bob. You got to go to South Africa and see what's happening there and see what we can do. And I had never been to South Africa. I had heard about what was going on. I knew about what was going on. So I went over there. I went over there with Bob Everson, who was the president and chief operating officer. And we got there, and the first thing that happened when we tried to check in the hotel, the guy who was checking us in, who happened to be a dark-skinned Indian fella, told me I couldn't check in, that Mr. Elverson could check in. And so Elverson stepped up to the plate. He told him that, he said, you want to keep this hotel open? he said, we've just purchased one of the largest companies down here. And if you want to keep this place open and everything else, he said, you better sign up Bob Brown right now. And then he went back and talked to, got the manager, and the manager came out, and the manager just welcomed me. He said, oh yeah, well, Mr. Brown, you're welcome here, and so forth. But they weren't letting Black people stay in a hotel in South Africa at that time. So I stayed there, you know, and the next couple of days, Mr. Elverson left, and I stayed there for the next 10 days, meeting with the board of directors down there, telling them what we needed to do, and going around to the different plants that they had. And I saw all of these things happening, that there were no Blacks in any kind of position or anywhere doing anything except sweeping floors and serving food to the other people and that kind of thing. And so we had to change all of that, and we did. Now, Mr. Mandela is another question. I went down there on many occasions and got to know a number of people down there and everything else, and got to know Mrs. Mandela. In fact, I took Mrs. King down there because she couldn't get a visa and I could, and I took her and a delegation of people down there. And we went to see Mrs. Mandela. And Mrs. King asked Mrs. Mandela, said, what is it that we can do to help you all that would be the greatest thing for you and Mr. Mandela? And she spoke up immediately and she said, the best thing that you all can do for us is to take our children and our grandchildren back to America, get them out. They can go because they have a way. Her daughter, Zanani, had a way to had a visa, and they could get out of there. And because up until that time, they weren't letting Blacks travel. They couldn't get a visa to go anywhere, couldn't get a passport. And so I agreed if she would write me a letter that I would bring them back to America and send them to school. I brought her daughter and her grandchildren and her son-in-law back to Boston, got them a house and a van, and brought all of them. They stayed here with me for 7 years, and I paid for everything, their schooling. They graduated from Boston University, where I sat on the board then and still am a retired board member. And that started off a whole nother chain of different kind of things, not only with the Mandela family, but across the board with many of the leadership. And I stayed involved down there for many years. In fact, on one of the occasions, which was most important, was President Borda called me and said to me, he didn't call me, his guy called me and said, President Borda wanted to see me. Well, I knew that President Borda didn't see anybody. He didn't even talk to his own people that much. And so I was a little bit shaky because I thought maybe this was the time they were going to kill me. I'd been too involved. So I went to see President Borda, and they invited me into, they had guns and everything at the gate. And so I went in and I was praying hard, and I'd call all over the country, let my family and friends know where I was going, because if I disappeared, they would know that they got me here. So I went to see him. And when I went in to see him, we sat down and he started chatting, and he was telling me, Mr. Brown, you've been in my country many years, and over these last year or so, and I'm glad you would come spend some time with me. I wanted to talk to you about what you think about my country. And I started telling him, I said, first of all, you need to release Mr. Mandela. And there are many other things that you can do in this country to make it a better country and a better world for all of us. And he listened, but he also got very angry on several occasions because I spent about an hour and a half with him talking about everything. And so it was an unbelievable meeting.
Wow. You know, Dr. Brown, I'm sad that we don't have hours, because we can learn so much from you and your example. And actually, my next couple of questions is really not of you. It's really of our leadership team. And so I know Louis and Eric, you guys have some specific questions, but I'd like to I'll turn it over to you first, Lewis, and then Eric. I'd like you to give me a takeaway. What is something about Dr. Brown's story? What is something about his example do you think we as a leadership team can learn from, can embody? Because the whole reason why I've asked him to be here is not to give him a chance to tell his story. He's won many lifetime achievement awards, and I'm sure he's told his story many times. But it's really for you guys to let you get blessed by his example. So, Lewis, let me start with you. You can ask your question, but what I'd really like to hear is what's something you learned or take away from Dr. Brown that you think would benefit GBA leaders?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Dr. Brown, for being here with us and giving us these life lessons. Definitely, I've been listening to what you've been saying. I do also love history. So I just had, I guess, a question relating to something I heard, a quote from maybe you have heard it from John L. Richmond. He was a Nixon advisor. So basically, in the quote, basically, I'll read it out loud. It says that the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies: the anti-war left and Black people. And you understand what I'm saying? We couldn't make it illegal to be against the war or Black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin, and then criminalize both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meeting, and vilify them right after night on the evening news. And then, did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. So that's actually a quote from John. So I'm just wondering, since you were close to President Nixon, there's some people say that actually the war on drugs was racially motivated. And I just wanted to get your input on that to since you lived during that time.
Well, I certainly did, was certainly there and was involved in a great many things. But in terms of the war on drugs, which still goes on to this day, we never we didn't have any no-knock situations where we went into homes, because I myself had been a federal drug agent at that point. That was part of my life. I'd been a policeman. So I knew what was going on, and I knew what was happening firsthand. I testified in the biggest mafia case in the history of the country. So there was no question about my relationship or what I knew about what was going on, not only at the hierarchy in the drug dealing, but in the street too. I worked in Harlem. I worked in different places in Washington, D.C., and in Canada and everywhere else across the country as a federal drug agent. And I testified in some of the biggest cases in the history of this country in terms of drugs. And so I knew from the street up until to the courtroom and to the hierarchy within the bureau. And so there were a lot of things that happened that probably shouldn't have happened. A lot of things that were said that probably shouldn't have been said, but there was a war going on with drugs. And to a very large extent, there's still a war going on with drugs. And it's one that we need to defeat at some point.
Great, thank you. And just a follow-up question would be, I guess that Black men account roughly 6.5 of the U.S. population. However, they make up like 40% of the prison population. How can this be changed? It seems the system is rigged and kind of racist per se. And prison no wages are the new modern than slavery. So is there a change? What could be changed to improve the communities?
Well, there are a lot of things that can be changed. I know that in many of our organizations across the board, in the Latino community, within the Black community, within the white community, in every community, we are all Americans. And we ought to be caring about and working to make sure that every American, no matter whether it's Latino, Black, white, or whoever he is treated fairly. That's what our system says, and that's what we're supposed to be about. But we have to be vigilant. If we go to sleep and think everything is all right, everything is not all right. We have to continue to stay on the case and fight where fighting is needed and do what is needed. But we cannot have our system in America or indeed in this world poisoned by drugs and violence and much of what is happening right now. We can't have that. We can't have that in America, and we live like we want to live, and we raise our children like we want to raise them and everything else. None of us will be safe. And so we have to have that kind of attitude and those kinds of forays in our community and in our government to make sure that everybody is treated fairly, no matter what they are accused of, because
Amen.
all of us are not guilty until proven guilty.
And amen. Lewis, before I give it over to Eric, what's one word that characterizes a quality or a feature of Dr. Brown that you'd like to carry forward after today?
I think persistent or survivor, definitely those words come to mind.
Determination. Yeah.
Determination, yes.
Yeah. Eric, what's a word or a characteristic of Dr. Brown that you think we as GBA leaders should embody? And then feel free to ask your question or comment.
Similarly, my word was perseverance. Whenever you have to fight from the underdog position, or wherever you have to go against the establishment institution, you have to always persevere. It's not going to come easy. It takes work, collaboration, and it takes a lot of devotion and effort, and sometimes a lot of prayer. And all that involves perseverance.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you very much for that. A lot of prayer. You know, a lot of times we don't think about that, but I pray so much sometimes I have to tell the Lord, I don't want to worry you, Lord, but I just want to tell you one more time how grateful I am and how much I need your help.
Amen.
Amen. Eric, did you have a question you wanted to ask? I want to sort of say focus on the learning points, because honestly, we could ask them questions all day, and maybe we'll find some other opportunity in the near term.
Well, you know me to go, Gerard, because my question does have, I hope, some learning points in it. Dr. Brown, thank you for your presentation, and thank you for speaking to us. It's indeed an honor to have you as part of our humble organization. I'm Eric Guthrie. I'm the Director of Training Programs for GBA. I'm also a Morehouse alumni, and I serve on the Board of Trustees of HBCU. So I'm very engaged in the community and advancing African Americans and diversity for all people. So here's my question.
Well, and also, wait, you're the author of a best-selling book, right? Diversify or Die.
I'm the author of 2 books. Thank you, Gerard. I wasn't trying to be so promoting, but since you gave me the floor, my first book is Diversify or Die. It's about diversity, inclusion, and how organizations can embrace diversity and inclusion to make a more profitable scenario for themselves. And my second book is Blockchain or Die, which is, of course, about blockchain technology and how it could also advance global efforts and global equity, as well as create profitable solutions for companies. So in my mind, diversity and profit and blockchain are all part of the same pie. So here's my question for you. We learn from the past, right? We should take lessons from the past and bring them to the future. And my question from a board perspective is, you know, when you were working with Nixon and some of the other high-level government organizations, what role did technology play in helping advance your mission, your objectives, what you want to accomplish for all people, and then take that lesson and how can we apply that in the future? How can we use the lessons of technology and the power of technology to advance diversity and to advance equity globally in the future? So I will stop there and I will anxiously await your reply.
Well, first of all, I found out that what we have to do with every situation is make a careful evaluation of that situation to see what is needed. Certainly, in many instances, you've got to have, in this day and time, you got to have the technology. In other instances, and so many times, you have to make sure that people are on board who are running these organizations, that people on board who are making the rules and regulations. Because many times you will find even today that many of the rules and regs that people have set up are meant to keep us out, not to bring us in. And that's the key, that we find out what all of those different things are, because they've been doing that for a very long time. I mean, when I went to Washington, we had one Black-owned automobile dealership. Black brick masons were not working on any jobs anywhere in America, where the GSA was spending billions of dollars building federal buildings without tax money. I mean, I can go time and time again with all kinds of things that we need to do. And we need to study everything to make sure that we are a part of it. And if we are not, we set up a ways and means to make sure that we are a part of it. We can do that today.
Awesome. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Rob, I know Ingrid is supposed to go on at 1, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't see her in the chat. I'm just gonna keep rolling until she comes in.
Actually, we do have a 1-hour lunch at 1 o'clock. So we
All right.
have,
Oh, good.
people can stay and ask questions if that's acceptable to Dr. Brown. We do have some wiggle room there.
Oh, excellent. So Dr. Brown, if you're willing to stay for a little bit over, I know we're beyond, but I know that there's a lot of people that would like to share some thoughts. And Ross and Terry, so I'm gonna let you wrap up at the end, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about the NFTs, and also we want to promote Dr. Brown's book as well. So, but Ross and Terry, so I'll bring you guys up last. Mayapan, did you have a thought or a question? Oh, and first, before you start, what's a learning point? What's something from Dr. Brown's life that we as GBA leaders should embody going into the future? And I see you, but I don't hear you. I think your microphone is, I don't think you're muted, but I think your microphone is off.
Now you're able to hear me?
Yep, now we can hear you.
Okay, fine. So, first of all, thanks a lot for Gerard for giving an opportunity to meet Mr. Dr. Brown. In fact, it is wonderful to meet you, Mr. Bob Brown. And basically, we always say thanks like this. And I'm from India, and I'm now a resident of Dubai. In fact, you have given me some impressive things. Where you start is not important, but where you end is very, very important, or where you go is very, very important. So in fact, I have a very steep thought process of anti-corruption, anti-bribery, and these kind of concepts, and also trust and equality, where I have 2 points which are in process. One is non-employee organization. Other one is something related to if a politician is not there, then why not a government can run? So these 2 things are pretty different topics as such. Just I wanted to just give my thought process to your side, so that if anything is there to guide me, of course I will surely take it up. Is there a possibility for state, because you have been with the government and with the politicians, so you are a very huge bridge. So is there any possibility that without a politician, a government can run? Other one is non-employee organization is possible.
And I want to share with you that Mayapan is out of Dubai, and he leads our GBA Global Standards and Certifications Working Group. And he's been instrumental working with people all around the world to come up with the standards. So just want to give you a little bit of his background.
Oh, very good. First of all, you have to work, you have to make inroads into the proper people in governments wherever you're working, particularly here in America and in other governments. I've worked all over the world. I worked in China and in Japan and all over Africa and everywhere. And you have to make the right kind of connections and the right kind of inroads to make a change. I mean, it just, because much of what the difficulty is with all of the problems that we face is that many of these problems have been around for a long time. And you have people who have a vested interest in making sure these problems stay like they are. Because they're where they are, and they're living better and doing better because there are problems, because they're on the other side. And so to make a breakthrough, you have to work at it. You have to uncover all kinds of things that can help you make that breakthrough. And you have to have people who are by your side and who are helping you and your organizations to make those kind of breakthroughs. You just don't make them just by going up asking them, because many times people are benefiting in a huge way from the problems that you have as a business person, or that many of us have.
Thank
I'd
you.
like
Thank you.
I-
Thank you, Mr. Bob.
I've got a question from Maria Escuela, who is just a wonderful human being. She's working on our badging work group and spent some time there in North Carolina. But before I do, I just want to share with you, Dr. Brown, some of my takeaways from what you said. And for me, it really starts with your grandmother, right? Because the two things that I took away from this, the story you told me today, plus the other ones when we were together, right? The number one was her love for people, right? And as I've heard these stories and some of the others, right? You never were out anywhere chasing your own desire or interest. You weren't trying to make yourself rich, right? In almost every story I heard you tell, I heard you say almost be like the guy in Die Hard, the reluctant hero, right? You were asked to serve. You say, well, I'll do it for a little bit, but I got to get back to my business, and then you end up serving for 4.5 years because I believe that you were called, you were answering a call as opposed to pursuing your own selfish interests. The second thing is selflessness, right? I think the story of when you told, and this is the first time I heard it today, about seeing where your grandfather was sold. And for those of you who don't know, he was sold to the correct me if I'm wrong, the railroad, and you eventually became the president of that railroad association. Is that right?
I was chairman of the board of that railroad, the North
Yes.
Carolina Railroad Company, one of the first railroad companies in America.
So think of
build a
that.
railroad.
The grandson of a slave to the railroad.
Great grandson.
Great grandson. Unbelievable. But I think that moment it imparted in you that something needed to be done, right? And
Absolutely.
so your willingness to essentially, and you talked about it before, just dive in, right? The other thing that I'd like us to take away as a group is think of the incredible impact that one man's life or one woman's life can have, right? And we as GBA leaders should recognize every single one of us have this exact same ability that Dr. Robert Brown had to make an impact in this world. Dr. Brown, there's nothing special about your DNA, or there's not, something special about your color or your intellect or anything like that made you such a game changer. Is that right?
That's right.
That's right. So if you can do it, anyway, in fact, you'd probably tell people that you're not as smart as other people or whatever, but you know what? You're just willing to work hard, have faith, your integrity. That's the other thing is integrity. So when you told those guys in whatever that city was, that if you let President Nixon come and speak, that you would honor that commitment, and you have a long memory, that's crucial, right? I don't think Mark Montoya is not in the Zoom. He's probably in the auditorium. We had a situation where we made a commitment, and then it became very, very inconvenient to honor that commitment, but ended up honoring that commitment had an incredibly positive benefit. And when you're willing to honor your commitments and be a man of integrity, right? People don't understand that's going to pay a dividend, and you may not see it now, right? But in God's timeline, that definitely, he's got a different arc than we see. So there's so many things about your story that I hope that those of us in our leadership team take away from that, right? The heart, the integrity, the understanding that we can do something. And Dr. Brown essentially was affiliated with folks in politics and government, right? But every single one of us have that kind of an impact. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ross and Tara Sue. Ross and Tara Sue, do you have any sort of final comments that we really need to let people go and get lunch? Um,
You guys. Absolutely. And thank you again, Dr. Brown. So just some takeaways that I just want to impress upon everybody in the room and in the lobby, and a sentiment from this office here. When Dr. Brown says there's unlimited possibility, he's already backed it up with a lifetime of demonstrating this, right? So it's true. It's the truth that you can absolutely accomplish anything. And we, as in this blockchain society, we're bridge builders. And being a bridge builder, like Mr. Brown, you're going to take hits from many sides. And it's important for us to stay focused on building that bridge in a way that's inclusive at all levels. And this does not exist in the blockchain industry right now. We do not have inclusiveness at all levels yet. And we need technology integrated through all societies, disenfranchised people as well, to open up this gateway. And the final point and takeaway from this is that whomever we are, whether we've been disenfranchised or whatever our roots, our message and Dr. Brown's legacy demonstrates that we can be victors and not victims. And that is what we need to carry forward, is demonstrate the victories of the past and demonstrate how we can help people be victorious in the future. And that all rests upon our ability to be inclusive bridge builders. And that's inspired by Dr. Brown. Thank you so much. I'm in your service forever.
Dr. Brown, I'll wrap it up now. Thank you, Ross and Tara Sue. Ross and Tara Sue are the bridges between Dr. Brown and our organization. And thank all of the GBA leaders, members and leaders that are in the auditorium, that are in the Zoom call, for all of your efforts. Let's go ahead and take these words that we've learned today and carry them in the future, and let's make an impact. So we're going to break for lunch. We'll see you guys all in about 15 minutes or so. And have a great lunch.